Evaluations for e-resources is pretty straightforward these days, and this is because of the counter reports. Counter is actually an acronym for an international standard that publishers, librarians, and others use for tracking the use of e-resources. There is a counter page, the consistent, credible, comparable. Anyways, it's projectcounter.org, and on this page you'll find a lot of really useful resources regarding this particular standard. And the wonderful thing about the standard is because it's implemented the same way across all publishers, or those publishers that do counter reports, because not all publishers have to. I mean, not all publishers have signed up to do this type of report, but all the big ones do, is the fact that they're comparing apples to apples to apples. So if I look at journal usage from Springer, and if I look at journal usage from Wiley, and if I look at journal usage from, say, Elsevier, I can look and compare title to title to title regardless of the publisher and see how popular or how used a given title is. Now, about the counter itself, just as a little note here, you can see it's a nonprofit, it is global, and it works with libraries, publishers, and vendors. And it says what it stands for, and you can read that information there. The real key here are the codes of practice. Now, there are a variety of different reports that are available. You can see here Release 4 of the Codes of Practice is the current one, and then there's a draft for Release 5 in the works right now. There's some general information. It talks about the purpose of counter, its scope, how it works, the strategies and governance, some definitions related to it. There are different versions depending on which type of e-resource you're working with. Counter works with databases, it works with ebooks and e-journals, and there are different types of reports for each one of those. In addition, there's a whole appendix on the actual definitions themselves. But over here are the key things, and it's the usage reports that we really want to look at. Also notice there's some issues related to compliance and auditing, and something called sushi, which I'll talk to briefly at the very end. So in the usage reports, these codes of practice, here's the list of them. You can see that there are different reports. For instance, reports related to journals, and the reports 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 is the most recent one. It's a historical listing. Total searches run by month. Successful information here. There's a denial, access of denial, which I'll be showing, and then report 1, which is the actual usage reports. And then you'll see there are database reports, as over in these sections here. And then further down, you'll find book reports. And I have examples of all of those for you today. Then there's some title reports. Also good, but I don't use the title reports that often in my day-to-day work. You can go down and you can actually look at some sample reports. They give you those breakdowns here, and I'm going to actually give you some real ones. And then keep in mind that the publishers are the ones who give you the reports. You connect to their sites, and then you can download them for a year, part of a year, covering 2 years. Your choice. Most publishers have at least the last few years of information up and available. The thing is, they do roll, which means every, a new year comes in, then an old year goes away. So it's important to keep your reports, and over time you can then get a really good picture of what's going on. And I'll give you some examples of that as well. So keeping in mind that we have these reports, and I want to look at sort of Journal Report 1, which is full text usage. We think that's probably the most important one, because if someone bothers to download an article, then that pretty much means that it's important to them, and somehow and they've used that. So I have here, this is a raw report from Elsevier from 2014. And this is how it comes. So when you run the report and you run it, and you can see Elsevier is probably our largest publisher. There's 2,600 to almost 2,700 items, i.e. journal titles. You'll be able to open them up, and you can see here are the titles. And then it'll tell you the publisher. So you get the journal itself. You get the platform, Science Direct. Sometimes you have multiple platforms. Most of the other things here, like ISS signs and things like that, are just for identifying things. What you really want here are the actual reports themselves. So you can see total, and then we actually have some information related to whether it's PDF or HTML. So here's HTML, and here's PDF, and then this H1 here is total. So we have a total here of 2.7 million downloads in 2014. Of those, roughly half of them are HTML and half of them are PDFs. So you can see that the HTML is just as popular as the PDFs. It's not the case for all journals, but that's pretty typical these days. Some titles are, you'll see more PDF. A few of them you'll see more HTML, although it tends to be more PDFs than HTML for downloads. And then the total is here. So if you think about it, 2.7 million articles in a year, 365 days. I mean, we could do a quick calculation. So we bring up our calculator, and you could say 2717901 divided by the 365 days in a year means that there are 7,446 downloads in any 24-hour period at Harvard University, which is a tremendous amount of use. So, and then it breaks it down by month. So you can actually see January, February, March, all the way up to December. And you'll expect certain ups and downs. You know, January is down term. Summertime tends to be down as well, although this particular August wasn't so bad. And then you can see certain up times, generally towards the end of the year. April being very busy, people getting to the finals and writing their papers. And then similarly at the end of the fall term. So this is what a journal report looks like. So you can see that some journals have high use and some journals have low use. Some have no use with zeros. And these can all be used in determining whether or not we're going to keep something or not, and what the cost per use is. So I'm going to close that one. And I don't need to save that at the moment. One of the great things about working with journals is you get their downloads, and then because you know the cost of the journal in a given time period, you can actually create the cost per use, which is obviously the use divided by the cost. So in this particular case, Nature, which is probably one of the most popular journals in the sciences, the cost per use is just 4 cents. So we get a tremendous amount of downloads, and then the cost, relatively speaking, is insignificant compared to the amount of downloads. And you can see some of them are a little higher. There's some up to 6. These just happen to be all the Nature titles. There's 1 in 50 here. There's 130. And I've highlighted these because their cost per download, or cost per use, is higher than our interlibrary loan costs. So these would be candidates for cancellations. These two titles here, Lab Animals and Vital, are way too high compared to many of the others, which are all very reasonable costs per use. So this is an example of taking the journal report, getting all the information, adding in our own data for costs that we pay for, and then determining the cost per use, and looking at that data to see if there may be titles that we're not getting our full benefit out of. So I'll close that one. Don't need to save that right now. This one here is a database. So I mentioned journals a moment ago. And I can see here in this database, InSpec, which is a physics, computer science, engineering style database. I get information on regular searches, federated, clicks, and views. So it's a little different. You can see here that's earlier, and as you get later, the various revisions add in a little bit more refined information. And then I have an older legacy component, so earlier materials versus recent materials. So this is 1969 onward in this section here, and then the prior to 1969, i.e. 1898 to 1968. So these repeat. So regular searches, federated results, and record views. Searches is important. We could do a cost per search, and we could also do the more important record views. So if someone did a search, they actually stop and look at an individual record. Both of those can be used. And this is just a historical component here. What can be done with this is we can see how often the searches change. So over years, we can see here the data, that InSpec use peaked and is now dropping. So it peaked here, 2013. In the last 2 years, it's dropped. I haven't added 2016 data to it yet. So that's something that could be done. Here we have another journal report. This one is called the historic one. It's recent. Not all vendors have implemented it. And this allows us to look at searching over time. So you can see these are the years. Year for 2014, etc. And then we go back. And the reason is we can ask ourselves, is this particular journal a legacy journal in the sense that some of the old material is still heavily used? Or is it just current edge, cutting edge, which many science journals are, but not all. So you can look back here historically and find out, is everything in the last few years being used, or do we want stuff that goes all the way back? So this is just an example here. Some of them are typical, like Nature. So you can see I'll highlight Nature here in yellow. And if we go back, you can see it doesn't have much use going all the way back. Almost all of Nature's use is in the last, say, we go up to W, so 1997-ish. So, just some things there. Some of the others would have a much, well actually, to be honest, I think that might be a slight error in there, because I think some of the earlier stuff from Nature is being used, but it might be under another database vendor. So we do get some of our earlier journals from other vendors. But that said, it gives you an idea here of how the journal, the report number 5 here, R3 is revision 3. So this one is 3 versus revision 4. It's important to know the differences between the revisions because the standards change over each revision. I'm not going to save that one either. I'll get to this one in a little bit. What I'd like to do is talk about turnaways. So one of the wonderful reports that we can get is who's going to our database and not getting access to it. Safari database in our setup is not unlimited. We have a certain amount of simultaneous users. So we want to know how many people are getting turned away. And you can see here that we've, at this point, I have a little note here that we're getting up to 1,200 people turned away in a given month, which is an awful lot. And then we've added 2 more people and suddenly it drops. So you can see the numbers here have dropped after we did that adding. But even then, we still had a pretty high turn-away rates here. So 4 users up to 6 users. And you can see the increase over this particular time period. And then we went up to 7 users and we went up to 9 users. And almost 9 do we get to the point where it's everyone is getting in when they want to, which highlights tends to be somewhere around 12 in the afternoon to 7-ish at night tends to be the high if you do an analysis over the time of a day. So a turnaway report, counter report 4 for eResource is an example there. So I'll close that one. Get to this one in another minute. Here is the book report, which is book report 2, revision 4, R4. I've done a lot of analysis using this. So what it is, I got all the information and then I prettied it up. I made it look really good. I sorted it by highest use to lowest use titles. So this particular introduction to probability had 79,000 uses, which is really high. It's usually not. The highest ones tend to be 8 or 9, maybe 10,000 like this one here. Modern JavaScript development and design. So, and then you can see that some were used 2,000 times a year, some are used 1,000 times a year. And then I went and I actually did a subject analysis. So you can see here the purple is business, psychology, and other non-IT. Safari tends to be an information technology database, mostly monographs. And then you can see green, data and science. This sort of orangey color, brownish color is visualization, and the blue is SAS statistics. So you can see the different colors, and in the top, tier of 100 or so, which is what I focused on here, we get some idea of the subject growth and which titles are very, very popular. And I can use this to make determinations if I want to buy more of these in electronic format or add some print formats. Because if I have a title that's being heavily used, like 10,000 times, maybe I want to have a print version. In fact, most of these we do have print versions, and I can show you high circulation statistics, although not as high as these like 2000s. We certainly don't have a book circulating 2,000 times. The idea here is it's not so much a circulation, but it's been referenced to. And that given that most of these are computer manuals, although some of them are other types of manuals, people going to them only need to look up some piece of information and then they're done. But all of that is used. So that's a counter book report number 4. So close that one, and I'm almost done here. So here we have another database. This is a database report, number 1, revision 4. So these are all different databases that we get from EBSCO. And I've highlighted some of them in different colors so I can keep track of their use over time. There we go. So inspect that summarized database that you saw the other day. I actually pull them out of different reports for each of the years for this particular counter report. So inspect there is an example of what came into that other report that I showed you earlier. The other one is Academic Search Premier, which is one of our largest ones. You can see there's quite a few uses per year. I mean, 230,000 uses. I mean, you can clear that and say 230,209 divided by 365. You know, that's 630 record views in a given day. And that's just that's a really high number, so unlike other databases, which can be quite small. And again, we use this to do analysis to figure out what the costs are. Finally, because we're comparing apples to apples and orange to oranges, we have this wonderful capability of looking at all or a set of different publishers. So I have Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, and Nature, and I've been tracking usage since 2008. I'm in the process of adding 15 and 16 data. But you can see here we have a total growth over those years, almost doubling from 2008 to 2014, and almost all of them have increased in usage. And we get this wonderful graph showing, Elsevier is our most highly used, Science Direct, and then following that is the Nature Publishing Group and Springer, and of course Nature and Springer recently merged, so I should see some interesting data once we do 15 and 16. And then Wiley, which is a little flatter, but still going up. So counter reports allow us to compare across publishers, which is something we could not do before. So I'll close that one. So again, these are very, very useful international standards. All libraries use them, public libraries as well as academic, although I'll be honest, academic libraries probably use them more than anyone else. But if you have e-resources, this is the way we want to handle them. There are other ways of analyzing electronic resources, but they all pale in comparison to the counter. If any of you have any questions, let me know. Bye.